I hope Beto O'Rourke's been watching today. Maybe he'd learn something about integrity and principles. You know, that guy's really something else. When he isn't claiming that kneeling for the national anthem is an act of patriotism and disrespecting men and women who serve, he's looking for a new gun ban to fight for. You know, but I guess a broken clock's right twice a day, because sometimes he makes a good point. Check this one out. I don't know that we should raise the age for buying an AR-15. Okay, so even Beto gets it. Denying law-abiding young adults their Second Amendment freedom to defend themselves and their families isn't just unconstitutional, it's downright immoral. Okay, apparently I was wrong. I took something out of context. Here's what he actually said. I don't know that we should raise the age for buying an AR-15. I just don't think we should be selling AR-15s in this country. Well, it's a sure shame that we won't hear from Beto this afternoon, but I think you'll like our next speaker. I'm not going to tell you about how he's led the fight to defend the Second Amendment in the U.S. Senate or stood firm for constitutional principles at every turn. I'm not going to tell you about the role that he played in putting great justices on courts all over the country. No, I figured I'd just introduce him as the guy who did the world a favor and kicked Beto's ass last year. Please welcome Senator Ted Cruz.
God bless the United States of America. And God bless the United States Constitution. You know, if there's one principle that has been true from the dawn of our nation, it is that when liberty is under assault, Americans rise to defend it. Right now today, we see liberty under assault. We see our fundamental rights, our First Amendment, our Second Amendment, all of our fundamental rights as Americans under assault, and it's a concerted assault. We see the 2020 Democratic primary field. You do have to wonder if it's a Saturday Night Live skit. It's a clown car, and they keep getting crazier clowns one after the other. You've got Bernie Sanders, the socialist, who they think is their centrist on Second Amendment issues. That's the starting point. You've got my old opponent, Beto O'Rourke, who first made national news doing a sit-in on the floor of the House of Representatives opposing the Second Amendment, who's happily called for banning semi-automatic weapons without, by the way, the funny thing is you see the Democrats call for this, they don't even know what a semi-automatic weapon is. It's sort of like their made-up title of assault weapon, which when you read the legislation they draft really means scary-looking guns. You've got Joe Biden, Uncle Joe. By the way, after this convention, Joe will be here offering back rubs for anyone who would like them. You do have to sign a liability waiver first. But you know, Uncle Joe had advice on protecting your home. He said, if anybody is attacking your house, just step outside with a double-barreled shotgun and fire both barrels in the air. Now, that is great advice if it so happens that you're being attacked by a flock of geese. And then you've got Kamala Harris, who is pledged to come after each and every one of us, to come after our gun rights, to use illegal and unconstitutional executive orders to do so, and whose intention, plain and simple, is to destroy the NRA. But you know, it's not just the politicians we're facing. It's also corporate America. Corporate America, the new tool that they're going after liberty is they're trying to use their force in corporate America. So you have banks threatening to cut off funding for those who believe in the Second Amendment. You have Mayor Rahm Emanuel trying to pressure banks to cut off funding for those who are protecting our Second Amendment rights. You have Dick's Sporting Goods. By the way, I got to say, the company is really appropriately named. I'm going to get in trouble for that one. But they've gone out of their way to ban firearms for their stores, and they basically said, our customers, we don't like you and we don't respect you. Gosh, who knew that would be bad for business? It's almost like they're taking a playbook out of the NFL. And then you've got the press. Perhaps the greatest positive benefit of the age of Trump is that nobody even pretends the press is fair and objective anymore. Fake news is evident each and every day as you see on every station reporters foaming at the mouth. And you know what? They're never more partisan than in the wake of a tragic shooting. When they work to try to put on not news, not journalism, but propaganda. Concerted, deliberate propaganda designed to slander every man and woman here. Designed to slander anyone who believes in personal liberty. So what do we do about it? Well, as I said, when liberty is under assault, Americans rise to the challenge. There are two things we need to do about it. Number one, we need to win the battle of ideas. Look, truth matters. The men and women here, we are speaking the truth. They are speaking lies. Truth. Why is the Second Amendment in the Bill of Rights? You know, it's not about hunting. Hunting is great fun. Hunting, it can be terrific to be out with some bird dogs going after birds. That can be one of the best things you can do. But the Second Amendment's not about hunting. It's not about target shooting or trap shooting. The Second Amendment is about the fundamental liberty you have and I have and every American has, that if someone comes into your home in the dead of night, someone with ill intent, someone seeking to harm your family, your fundamental right to stand up and defend your life and defend your family and defend your children. The Second Amendment is fundamentally about a free people defending themselves. You know, everyone here is familiar with the tragedy of Sutherland Springs. Sutherland Springs happened in my home state of Texas. The worst church shooting in the history of the country. I'll tell you, I was there on Sutherland Springs the day after the shooting. I was in that beautiful sanctuary where that depraved, sick madman murdered so many innocent people. But Sutherland Springs is not just a story of evil. It's not just a story of hatred and murder. Sutherland Springs is at the same time a story of courage and heroism and sacrifice. Sutherland Springs is the story of Stephen Williford standing up and stopping that psychopathic murderer. We need to tell that story over and over and over again, both halves of it, because look, here's the mind of a liberal. I'm sorry, I apologize for getting into scary topics. But here's the mind of a liberal. They see a homicidal mass murderer and a brave patriot standing up and stopping that homicidal mass murderer, and they say, let's take the gun away from Stephen Williford and let's not do anything about that psychopath. As we might say in Texas, that don't make no sense. Look, one of the things we understand is the difference between good guys and bad guys. This is something that the left and the press, they can't make this fundamental distinction. Good guys, law-abiding Americans, it is freedom. It is our right to defend our families. Bad guys, if you are a violent criminal, if you are a murderer, we're going to come down on you, we're going to take your guns from you, and we're going to put you in jail. And you know, Sutherland Springs powerfully illustrates the hypocrisy of the left. The murderer in that instance, it was doubly illegal for him to possess a firearm. Doubly illegal. Why is that? Number one, he had a felony conviction, which made him ineligible as a felon to purchase or own a firearm. Number two, he had a domestic violence conviction, which made him doubly ineligible to purchase or own a firearm. So how did he get the weapons that he used to commit that mass murder? Well, the Obama administration, the Air Force in the Obama administration never reported his convictions to the background check database. They just didn't report it. So when he went in to buy those firearms, he filled out the form and he checked the box, no, I don't have any felony convictions. He checked the box, no, I don't have any domestic violence convictions. Now those were lies and those were felonies. When he lied on that form, he was committing yet another criminal offense. Now, I'll tell you, years earlier in 2013, my first year in the Senate, when following the tragedy of Sandy Hook, Democrats came once again trying to restrict our Second Amendment rights, I teamed up with Chuck Grassley to introduce what was called Grassley-Cruz, the law enforcement alternative. And what did it do? It did what is common sense. Focus on the bad guys, not the good guys. So it mandated that the Department of Justice audit every federal agency to make sure felony convictions are reported and part of the background check database. If that had been the law, the Sutherland Springs shooter's conviction would have been in the database. But not only that, the Obama administration for years had a pattern of practice. They didn't prosecute felons or fugitives who tried to illegally buy firearms. So you get a felon who goes in to buy a firearm, they lie on the form, they commit a felony, and the Obama administration did nothing about it. I had a hearing in the Senate where one Democratic police chief said, we don't have time to deal with paperwork offenses. Well, let me tell you something. If you've got a murderer who's trying to illegally buy a gun, I don't consider that a paperwork offense, and I want that murderer off the streets and in a jail cell instead of taking the lives of innocent Americans. Grassley-Cruz, which was also known as the law enforcement alternative, created a gun crime task force of the Department of Justice. It directed the Department of Justice, if a felon or fugitive tries to illegally buy a gun, prosecute him and put him in jail. That legislation got 52 votes on the floor of the Senate. Got the most bipartisan support of any of the comprehensive legislation we voted on. But do you know why Grassley-Cruz didn't become law? Because Senate Democrats filibustered it. Their view was, if they couldn't take away your rights, if they couldn't go after the law-abiding, the rights of law-abiding citizens, they weren't interested in stopping the criminals. And in fact, they were going to block us from stopping the criminals because their only interest is going after the rights of law-abiding citizens. If Grassley-Cruz had been passed, if it hadn't been filibustered, the Sutherland Springs shooter's felony conviction would have been in the database, and when he lied on the form, the Department of Justice would have prosecuted him, and that means he would have been in a federal jail cell instead of in that beautiful sanctuary taking the lives of those innocent men, women, and children. Now, let me ask you something in the battle of ideas. When have you ever seen a Democrat asked, why did you filibuster legislation that could have stopped that mass shooting? Do you know of any reporter who has ever asked a Democrat that? Have they ever been held to account? Instead, their solution, what's their solution? Gun control for law-abiding citizens. Well, that works wonderfully. Take a look at Chicago. Well, you know, there are no guns in Chicago. They have strict gun control, so of course that means there are no guns in Chicago except for the tragic murders that happen night after night after night, because who has guns in Chicago? The criminals. Who doesn't have guns in Chicago? The law-abiding citizens who need to defend themselves against the criminals. At the end of the day, this ain't complicated. They're good guys and bad guys. But we need to win the battle of ideas, and that means also we can't count on the media. We need to use humor. We need to tell stories. We need to use social media. We need to connect directly and tell the truth. Their ideas are a train wreck. They don't work. The second big thing we've got to do is we have got to mobilize. Let me tell you, there is an assault coming after our liberties in 2020 unlike any we've ever seen. In Texas, in 2018, I just came through a re-election campaign. Let me point to 2018 as foreshadowing of what's coming in 2020. In Texas in 2018, my Democratic opponent raised and spent over $80 million against me. He outspent us 3-1. Now, what does that mean? I've heard some people say, oh, come on, money doesn't matter in politics. Really? Well, let me give you an idea of what that meant in practice. My campaign had a total of 18 full-time campaign staffers. Beto O'Rourke's campaign had 805. That's the differential on the ground. 18 versus 805. They outspend us 3-1. It ended up being the most expensive Senate race in the history of the country. And they increased Democratic turnout in the state of Texas more than 100%. It went from 1.8 million to 4 million. Now, thankfully, we turned out 4.2 million Republicans, and that 0.2 million was the entire margin of success. To those of you who helped, to those of you who contributed, to those of you who volunteered, to those of you who knocked on doors, to those of you who made phone calls, thank you, thank you, thank you for standing and fighting for our liberty. But that 2018 assault is foreshadowing for what's coming in 2020. Listen, the far left is ticked off. They're filled with rage and fury, and anger in politics is dangerous. They wake up in the morning hating Donald Trump, and they go to bed at night hating Donald Trump. That means they're giving money. That means they're knocking on doors. That means they're volunteering. And that means in states, you might live in a red state, that you think, okay, our state's going to be fine. Let me tell you, everyone on the left is going to show up energized and angry. Now, the good news is the majority in our country believe in liberty, believe in common sense, believe in the Second Amendment, but here's the key: we got to make sure they show up. Our danger collectively is complacency, is people sitting at home saying, you know what, my job is great, my wages are up, I don't need to get involved. That's how we lose our freedoms. That's all it takes is a moment's complacency. Let me close with one of my favorite stories of my home state of Texas. And it is the story of the city of Gonzales. Texas, at the time, was part of Mexico. And the Mexican dictator, General Santa Anna, sent an order to the Texians, that's what they used to be called, the Texians at Gonzales, little bitty town, central to South Texas. An order to the Texians, hand over your guns. Hand them over. The dictator was going to disarm them, and he said, hand over the cannon that guards the city, as a cannon guarded the city when you entered. The Texians at Gonzales, they made a flag that they hoisted atop the flagpole. That flag had a picture of the cannon, and underneath it, the very simple legend, come and take it. When they hoisted the flag, that was the beginning of the Texas Revolution, where Texians rose up and won our independence from Mexico by fighting for our liberties. That spirit is Texas, but that spirit is also the United States of America. It is who we are, it is who you are, and it is why I am proud to stand with the men and women gathered here. I'm proud to stand with you in support of the Second Amendment of the Bill of Rights, of the Constitution of the United States of America. Thank you. God bless you.